Hey yo, salute to all my subscribers, and a special shout out to everybody else passing through. You are now tuned in to the LREIB podcast. Welcome back. Alright, salutations to everybody out there listening, YouTube viewership, as well as the iTunes, Google Play, and Spotify crowd. I appreciate all of you for listening to my podcast episodes. Please remember, this is true for every episode. If ever you have an idea for a topic you want to hear me go over, or if you want to be a part of one of my episodes, discuss a topic with me, past or one that you want to come up with on your own, one that you might have heard me discuss previously, either in a solo episode or an episode where I went back and forth with a guest host, or if you just want to hear me discuss something and you have an idea for a topic, hit me up at Straight Talk 315, all spelled out, Straight Talk 315 at Gmail, and I will 100% be happy to oblige on that. I came through with a couple things I wanted to discuss and go over. A couple things that came across my desk. So first, and the two things are somewhat related. First thing, apparently there's been a campaign to change the names of institutions, buildings, statues, monuments, essentially, in southern regions of this country that were dedicated, erected to honor people who were around during the times of slavery and had, buildings and things named after them. More specifically, for the purpose of this topic, a man by the name of Steve Austin from out in Austin, Texas. There's a university called Austin University, actually. I'm out in Austin, Texas, named after this man who was probably the biggest slave owner back during that time period. And so Austin University, which is out in Texas, was actually named after him. And then if I remember reading correctly, there's also a statue that was erected in his honor also. And the reason why I wanted to talk about this that came across my desk is for a couple reasons. I'm a little bit conflicted, in my opinion, about how I feel about this situation. I was listening to a talk radio show that I typically listen to earlier today, and some of the people who called in to comment and give their opinion, they were a little conflicted as well. Some people who were parents who have kids who are going to be college age, they talked about, their kids maybe getting scholarships or getting accepted to that school, and would they not allow them to go if the name weren't changed? And of course, I'm referring to, the Black community, the African American people who weighed in on the subject. Pretty much all of them said, that although they do feel like the name should be changed of this university, because of the history, in this country, especially in the southern regions of this country, with all that went on back then with slavery, and people who look like me come from places where I come from, who had no rights, didn't even have their freedom. Changing the name is a step in the right direction to addressing the not only the issue of racism present day, but also acknowledging the history of it, which we all know this country for so long was hesitant to do. And then on the other side, some people felt like changing the name would just be just kind of a meaningless platitude or a surface thing to do. And some people felt like it was long overdue and the name should be changed. And I guess a part of the reason why I wanted to bring this to my platform is because I'm a little bit conflicted, and I probably fall somewhere in the middle, like most of the people who I heard kind of giving their take and their opinion. My thing is this. I think that we as a country, as a society, as a civilized, society in 2018, I think we spend too much time and energy on things that are surface and not enough time and energy on actually changing the underlying issues. This is not the first time we've come across things like name change and, when it comes to either derogatory or negative adjectives. There a few years back, football team, the Indians, there was a big thing about that name being changed, and because of the sensitive nature of the situation with the Native Americans in this country's history and all these different things. And this is just another example of that type of situation. I understand the gesture. I understand the thought process behind wanting to vote to deal with some of these figures who were honored back during a time of extreme ignorance in this country. But now, everyone's finally starting to realize that these people, these are not figures who should have been honored. There was no reason for them to be honored and have statues and buildings and institutions, let alone institutions that, where education is taught, erected, in honor of these figures, these people. But my thing is this, though, and this is the same concept that I feel applies to my thoughts on the whole Make America Great Again slogan and the hats. And, my thing is this. You can change the name of a building. You can take down a statue. You can remove the MAGA hats from the heads of any racist person you see wearing one. But you don't change the culture or the attitude. You don't change the person, what their views, thoughts, ideals are. You can't calibrate or recalibrate another person's moral compass. We can change the name, and that's a great start. But the underlying meaning behind why that building was named after this person, why that statue was erected in this person's honor. You can take a Make America Great Again hat off of a racist, but that person is still going to be that person with or without that hat on. All we do is we rename, we recategorize, we relabel things for the purpose of us being able to readily identify those things. But, we're at a point now in this country and in this social climate where whether you're able to identify these things or not, people are so emboldened by their prejudices and racism that they don't care if we know who they are or not. And quite frankly, I don't necessarily need physical identifiers. If the culture is going to remain the same, if the attitude of racism is going to remain the same, then it really, in my opinion, it really does no more or less harm to start renaming buildings and, institutions, sports teams, what have you. Again, it's a step in the right direction, but I do feel like it's largely surface and it's not really going to mean anything one way or another. I'm sure that there are people local to Austin, Texas, who may feel away. They may be natives of that part of the country. And then you may have people who are still alive, who experienced the prejudices and the racism that went on during that time, who may take this as a pretty big victory. And both sides would be correct. Both sides would have merit in their argument. Because I don't think I understand the confliction. I understand words have meanings. And I also understand that without context, and without the definition that we assign to most things, based on those nonverbal and outside of societal cues, that really at the end of the day, what are you really changing? And so I wanted to bring this to the platform to reintroduce it after I heard this show on this talk radio show that I listened to and then read about it online. I wanted to reintroduce it on this platform because I'm interested about what you guys think as well. Feedback is always welcome. But do you think that it really will make a difference to have this university out in Austin renamed? And then if they rename it, what would they rename it? Like, what would be the name that would replace it? I don't know. That part wasn't really discussed in depth, wasn't really touched on in the article that I read. But I guess it's a twofold question. Does it really matter to change the name at this point? All these centuries and decades, all these decades later, does it really serve a purpose? If it does, what is that purpose? And if it doesn't, why not? Does changing the name or taking down a statue of something that is, honoring a person in history that really was about regression and not progression, and about the plight of a group of people. Do we focus on that, or do we try and find ways to actually change the overall culture and the overall attitude of the ideals that a person like that actually stood for? That's what I'm interested in knowing. StraightTalk315@gmail. Let me know what you guys think. The other thing that I wanted to discuss, there are some teachers who are getting backlash, or specifically a teacher getting backlash for teaching young students about slavery, but not just the fact that this teacher was teaching these students about slavery, the manner in which these lessons were taught, outraged some parents and some other educators. And this actually happened out in New York, out in the Bronx. And what I thought was interesting about this story is that this teacher is being accused of going too far because of the manner in which she was teaching this lesson. I guess she had a bunch of kids in the classroom kind of huddle up close together, back to back, side to side, what have you, as a way to illustrate what the journey was like as the slaves were transported to this country on boats, shackled and chained, and there were several people who felt like that technique was too far, that it was not appropriate for young children to be getting a lesson like that in quite that manner. And I'm really interested to know what the thoughts of the people who listen to my platform think about this kind of thing, because honestly, you don't see the true history of this country being taught in schools anymore anyway. And then when they are, they're watered down. They're made to be this thing that almost, I don't want to say romanticizes tragedies that happen in our country's history and in world history, but it doesn't give it the full effect that it should. And I brought this topic up because as a parent, as a black parent, and as a black man in America, young black man in America at 34, one of the things I think is the biggest detriment to our children these days is that they're being raised with a very false, or at the very least skewed sense of reality when it comes to the real world and how things really work. And I think if we don't get out of this new way of thinking, of being overly sensitive and sheltering these kids from everything because we think that things are inappropriate, or we think that they don't have the capacity to be exposed to these different things. I think if we don't get out of that way, shit gets a lot worse and stays that way for a lot longer. And we're going to have a hard time turning this thing around, because at some point, the kids that we're raising now, we're going to have to turn this country over to them. We're going to have to turn over the podiums and on these political stages. We're going to have to turn over the benches in these courtrooms, and we're going to have to turn over, positions in not only government but in law enforcement, and also classrooms, as some of these kids that we are raising today grow up to become educators. If we don't set the tone, some of the most tragic memories in this country's history will be forgotten. I mean, it's already being written out of textbooks for the most part. And I think certain things need to be, not graphic necessarily, but as brutally honest as possibly can be, where, a child, obviously dependent on age group and grade level, would have the propensity to understand those things. And things can be given straightforward as they are without being watered down. And as long as these things are delivered to these kids and these young adults in, pieces at a time that are digestible. And I don't see the issue with teaching the real about what actually happened and letting these kids really experience that through these lessons without us having to water them down and sugarcoat everything. Because the fact of the matter is that too many kids now are being raised over sheltered, and then coming of age, being sent out into the real world, and then getting hit with that harsh reality that the world don't give a shit about who you are, where you come from, what you had or didn't have growing up, who your parents are or who they weren't, whether they were present or not. The world is a cold place, and the more that we shelter our kids, the more that we choose not to teach them the real about what actually happened, the less prepared we're actually making them for the lives that they're going to have to live. Whatever ethnic background, whatever cultural background, from all walks of life, it's all the same struggles. They just look slightly different from one race to the next. I just think that we need to get back to a time where, things were presented as they were, and they were presented in a way that you would understand them, but they weren't taken away from. Once you start to take away from things, then you have to choose what things to take away, what things to leave in. And then in these lessons, when you choose to take away certain things, you have no way to know at that point which of those things that you choose to take away are vital to that lesson really being driven home. And the last thing that we need, especially, me speaking on behalf of the Black community, the last thing we need is more of our children growing up and not having a clue about their true history and what the true history of this country was. There was a poll done, and something like 80-90% of students in this who participated in this poll didn't even know what the cause of the or one of the main causes for the Civil War was. And that's tragic to not know that, to know that there are kids, there are students out there who are being raised, who are being taught, educated, and don't know the triggers and the causes for wars that took place in this country, wars that were fought, wars that where people bled and died for freedom that was not afforded to them as human beings, just because of what they looked like, just because of, the color of their skin. And these things are very serious and very necessary. You can't have these young unarmed kids who are interacting with police, and tragically some of them who don't make it alive out of some of those interactions, too many, who have to experience the wrong side of racism, the wrong side of prejudice, but don't know the history and don't know that these things were going on long before them, and these things are not the result of anything that they did wrong, or and it's not something that's new. I don't know. Let me know what you all think. Hit me up at straighttalk315@gmail.com. I didn't mean to make this one too long. Just wanted to stop by, touch base on these couple topics that I came across. I'll be back with another topic very shortly. And let me know what you guys think. All right, if you listen to this podcast, you think I talk a lot of shit, you're 100% correct. I talk a lot of shit because I'm passionate about the shit that I talk about. And if you listen to this podcast and you think I'm overly opinionated, well, then you're 100% correct. Again, we all have opinions. The difference is I try to use my opinions to affect positive change. At the end of the day, I'm just a realist who sees shit for what it is and who tries to approach every situation in a commonsensical way. There are few things that separate us: oceans, borders, and culture. And outside of those few things, we are all just one part of a human race trying to find the best way to carve out a life for ourselves and the people we care about. I don't pretend to know everything. I just know what I know. And I'll see you on the next one. Peace and love.